Howdy folks. Today we're going to start looking at React and what React is. And at the core of React is JSX. So I want to start this off by just giving you a bit of an overview of what JSX is and why we utilize it. So let's take a look at my index.html here. All right, I've got some bunch of stuff in the head. We'll ignore most of that. We'll get to that later. My body, I have a div. Has a class on it. I have another div with a class on it, some text, and an input. All right. If I open this up, this is what it looks like. Right inside the body, we have our class, our input. So, what if I told you I wanted you to create this all in JavaScript? No, no HTML at all. Okay. Well, let's take a look how we would do that. So let's start off by creating a new app main. We're going to use a lot of document create element, right? Div, and then we add a class, dot class list, app main. Okay, then we need another name outer, dot create element. Another div, and then let's add a class to it. Dot class list dot add name outer, and then we want to actually say app main dot append child name outer. But also we need to make this name text, and so there's a couple ways we could do that. We could just actually change the HTML, so we could say name outer.inner text or inner HTML. There's another way though. We can actually create a text element. So text equals document.create text node name. Oops. So that's how you actually just create text as a DOM object, which is, kind of interesting. We're not going to style it. We're just going to put it onto name outer, and then we've got our input. Input equals document, I spelled that wrong. Document dot create element input. Okay. And then input dot set attribute type text name outer dot append child input. Then at the very end, we get our body, which is going to be document body append child app main. All right. Now, if we go through that and we get rid of all that here, that should essentially do the same thing. So run here. Oh, we got an error. Failed to execute end child and node. The new child element contains the parent. Line 17. Oh yeah, because name outer shouldn't append itself. It should be appending text. That makes sense. And there we go. We have our name. App main, name outer, we have our name, we have our input type, right? In fact, I think there might have been a space in there. So this is great if we need to do this with JavaScript, but it would also be kind of great if we had maybe a quicker way of creating these, right? Like maybe we have some sort of a function that builds it for us. It'd be cool if I could just say app main equals a component div and just give it like some attributes and children like that, right? And maybe I say class app main. That'd be pretty cool, right? Because you can see how much space that's saving. And then if I did another one for here, I could just say comp stands for component, by the way. Class name outer, and that'd also be pretty cool. So if I run that, still works pretty well. Creates a div, it creates that class, but it's less lines of code, right? And maybe I even want to be able to nest it. Like I want to be able to say, okay, well I know that the name outer has name inside of it, so maybe I want to be able to put name like that, and then just not have that text in there at all. Okay, if I run that, still same thing. Maybe I want to be able to put other components in there. So I want to be able to put a component for the input. Okay. Text like that. And then I don't need any of that stuff at all. That's a lot cleaner. You can see how that, it's the same thing, but it's a lot cleaner. It's compressed things. And now, in fact, I don't even need name outer. I can just grab that and I can put that as the child of app main. And now I've just got these two statements, right, that builds this. And you can kind of see this tree actually looks a little bit like HTML, doesn't it? Just make sure if I run that, you can see same thing, app main, name outer, name type text. Yeah, because then I could do cool stuff like let name equals Robert, and then I can go in here and I can change the value to name. Go in here. There we go. So this is kind of a nice way of just building a system of tags very quickly. Okay, so let's say I have that comp, right? But maybe I don't want name to be a global thing. Maybe I actually want my app to be more like a function, right? So I make a function. Okay, I call it function app. Okay. And then I put my name inside there, just so it doesn't, pollute my global scope. And then I'm just going to return this. Like that. And then, of course, app main, I have to call the function here. Okay, and that should be okay. Run that, it's still in there. Cool. Well, maybe I want to take this name stuff. Maybe I want to duplicate that, right? So maybe I want to make a function labeled input that takes in like the label, okay? And then maybe I just grab this in here and I return that, but instead of this name, I say label plus. Okay, and so then in here, I'm going to have label 1, labeled input, and I say label name, and then I do another one for the age, maybe. Label 2 is going to be age. Okay, and then I just kind of toss them in here. Label 1, label 2. This actually is no longer going to be in there, so I'm just going to take the value out. And you can see we're building some labels, okay? Now I've got 2 labels in there. Very cool. This is useful now because I can build these dynamically if I want to. But wouldn't it be cool if I didn't even have to put this boilerplate in here? I could just make that a comp and just pass in labeled input and label name. That'd be cool. And there we go. We can do that. So now I just duplicate this, labeled input, label age. And so now what I've got is I've got complicated components, basically, right? So this labeled input, this is going to be a div that has a label with an input. And if I go here, you can see there's 2 name outers in here. And they both have a label and text. But let's say I want to do another one. It's as easy as just making this and putting another thing on it, right? So then I could just say something like date of birth, right? Reload that. There it is. So I'm building my UI now very quickly with this component that has this labeled input on it. And I can even have something like, I could even make an array. Name, age, date of birth. And then I could just do a map in here. Labels.map, label. And then this could just return this component with that label in it. That's even easier. Oops, I got an error. Failed to execute a pin child node. Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. My system doesn't completely work with that. I have built a comp system here, but imagine that you could do that. That does work in JSX. So how do we get from here to JSX? What is JSX? Well, imagine this was HTML. All right. Imagine that instead of this labeled input and this app and all this stuff, instead of this comp, right, imagine I could just return div. Why do I say class name here instead of class? Because class is a reserved word. And then I could just say label, and then input text. That'd be pretty cool if that worked, wouldn't it? Because you can see this looks like kind of like HTML, and you can work with it. This is HTML. This is very easy to understand. I mean, you've got almost like our handlebars template here, where I've got a label going in here. And then what would our app look like? Well, it kind of looked like div app main. And then, well, similar to here, we could actually just say like labeled input, label equals name. And then maybe we copy this a couple times. Age, date of birth. That'd be pretty cool if we can make that work. Well, here's the thing. We can. This is what is known as JSX. So what JSX does is it's basically HTML, except you can put parameterization in. It's similar to handlebars, but this parameterization can be anything, any JavaScript, any valid JavaScript at all. And here, this is not a standard HTML component, right? This is a function, but it works in JSX. JSX will automatically call that function. And it knows, it basically turns into something that looks very much like this comment. How does it do that? Well, there's a specific package that exists called Babel. And Babel is designed to take JavaScript and manipulate it and change it into other forms. It originally was built so that we could take new ES6 concepts that browsers didn't support, and it would backport them and recompile them so that they looked like ES5 code. So you could still write that nifty code, but ES6 would just, or Babel would just spit out ES5 code that would work on multiple browsers, which was really great when these features were first coming out. It also knows JSX. Well, how does it do that? A specific plugin. Plugin transform React JSX. Now the React part, we'll get into that. React kind of invented JSX, and so that's why they hold a claim to a lot of it. JSX is not just used by React. So I've got this plugin here, right? Plugin transform React JSX. Bunch of options here. Don't worry about those too much. But if we run those, let's see what it does. So I'm going to go and open up my terminal here. And I already have, I have a package JSON thing in here, Babel. You can see I'm running it over index.js, and I'm telling it to output to the build directory. So we can see what that does. Babel automatically picks up this Babel config JSON file, so it just knows that that's there. So npm run Babel. It says, okay, it thinks about it, successfully compiled one file. So let's take a look at what it did. Put it side by side with the source. So first of all, it imported these functions because Babel expects that you're using a third-party library. I'm not using a third-party library for my component or my comp function, but that's okay. It's got the JSX and JSXS, right? So two functions, right? One for plural, or one for, I think this one is just for like class things like div here. And then the JSX is for other like component stuff. So it took this div and basically did what we did with our comp function. Took that, put that in div. We've got our class name. It put that in here. It made a special thing called children, whereas we had an array. But you can see it put as children, our label variable, string, and then this another JSX input, right? And that is a type text. So this is basically doing the same thing as we had here. We had our comp with input type text. They have their JSX with input type text. Let's go down a little bit further. Same thing, div. I'm actually realizing this is probably, I think this JSXS is for with children. So it's when the children are in there. Interesting. Class name, children, right? Labeled input, labeled input, labeled input, and each one of those has its own label. And that is that particular function right there. That is JSX. That is how it works. And if we had this hooked up appropriately, it would just work. So this gives us, this JSX gives us the ability to write sudo HTML right in the middle of our JavaScript file. Like you can see, this is a JavaScript file. It outputs to a JavaScript file. And that gives us the ability to very rapidly prototype and write our code. So like you can see, I can just put a bunch of stuff. I can have this specific label and this type text, and I can just duplicate it as many times as I want. We would have to before create a function, call that function, append that child, etc., etc. It'd be a real pain. This makes it very easy. We just write HTML. And it's a little different, right? We've got this handlebar style thing. And then Babel takes care of turning that into JavaScript. The only downside of this, we can no longer open our HTML pages directly. So if I open this index.html now with this code, well, let's take a look. It says no, unexpected token at index.js6, because I ran into that div and it said, what is this? This is not JavaScript. On the other hand, this is JavaScript. So we have to now at this point run Babel every time we make a change to get the JavaScript to be created. Now there are tools that do that for us automatically, and we will look at those later on. But this is just the intro to JSX. This is how it works, and this is how we can use Babel to turn it into something that JavaScript can understand. We don't have to write this code. We write this code, and then it turns into JavaScript code, which is really, really helpful for building complex applications, because you can just have your HTML in your JavaScript, and it makes it so much easier to build things. Anyway, that's all for today. Hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all in class.